If you recently had the chance to play the finals on Steam, you might have come across this weird Pyro grenade, which is like a cross between a lighter and a grenade. Now, the reason I'm mentioning this is I saw this model and I really liked it, and I figured I want to remodel this inside of Blender. Now, you might notice it has some holes inside of it, and you could use booleans, but the reason I don't like booleans is because they leave behind a mess, and unless you go through cleaning them up manually, putting a subdivision modifier on top of it will mess everything up even more. And don't even talk about putting bevels or solidify modifiers and whatnot. And this is all assuming you're using the standard vanilla Blender without using any paid add-ons. So I'm going to show you in this video how I made this grenade. I started out using primitive shapes for the basics. I may not have gotten everything right, like the shape might not be one-to-one, but it's about like the general idea of getting all the bits and pieces of the grenade. I mostly relied on a subdivision modifier and a solidify modifier, and sometimes I would actually stack them on top of each other, putting a subdivision before the solidify and then one after. This way it would crease the edges and keep everything smooth overall. And what I would do later on to UV unwrap this model was to apply the first subdivision and solidify modifiers and then clean up a little bit. So in this case where I'm putting the holes inside of the model, essentially what I'm doing here is grabbing 4 faces and I'm insetting them, and then I'm using loop tools, which is a free add-on from Blender itself. All you need to do is to activate it in the preferences, and then you set the shape to be a circle, and then you just delete it. Whenever you're modeling using a subdivision modifier, you have to take into account that it will basically almost interpolate between the vertices. So if you have a square hole and you subdivide that, it almost turns into a circle. But that goes for every square hole or rectangular hole that you create. So in this case, I had to shift some of the edges around to make sure that the rectangular gap that I created would actually be rectangular and not round in the corners. For this piece that holds the pin of the grenade, I grabbed a bunch of the edges and beveled them, and then added an edge loop in the middle of each one of them to turn them into quads, but moreover to give them that additional bump. Which, speaking of, by the way, if you have some triangles in your models and it's subdivided, I know a lot of people will make a big deal out of it. I'll be here to tell you it really doesn't matter, especially if it's in a small corner, nobody's gonna notice it. And also, when you put a subdivision modifier on something and export it, it will turn all your triangles into quads anyway. So yeah, unless it's like really in your face, if you have like a triangle here or there, don't waste your time like trying to figure it out. I once saw this guy during an art challenge spending almost 3 hours trying to fix the topology on the bottom of his character's foot, and his character was standing in lava, so you couldn't even see it. He didn't even have to model the legs, which, you know, those kind of things, those kind of beginner mistakes you'll make a lot in the beginning when you're starting out. You want to model every single piece, but you have to realize that you should really spend time on modeling stuff that you can actually see. But do plan ahead, you know. And what I mean by that is, if you have a character and you want to say skip the feet and you just model the shoes, but then later on in your animation the character takes off their shoes, now you're fucked because your character obviously needed feet. So do plan ahead when you model your characters or objects or whatever. It actually took me about 35 minutes to model this grenade from scratch to finish, and then another like 10 minutes to UV unwrap it, which overall I would say is a pretty good time to model something of this caliber. You know, one fun thing about this Pyro grenade model is that once I added the cap on top of it, I realized that it almost looks like a World War II Nazi soldier from the side when the cap is in a closed position, but really only from the side. I don't know if that was done on purpose, but I don't think you can actually see it like this in the game, but something fun that I just noticed along the way. So here I added a bunch of basic materials in Blender just to see my object in action and kind of get a feel for it. So these would be like some very early look dev renders. And yeah, just overall just have fun with it, you know. But yeah, that's the way to model without using booleans, using a sub-D modeling workflow. Hope you learned something from this. See you in the next video.